The sharp smell of lavender and lye hung over the town market stall when Paloma heard Marlene say it, loud enough for strangers to turn their heads. "Oh, come on," Marlene said, smiling for the crowd like this was all some silly misunderstanding. "You make little soaps at home. That doesn't make you a real businesswoman." For 1 second, Paloma just stood there, fingers cold around the strap of her canvas bag. In front of her were neat rows of wrapped bars, amber bottles, tiny salve tins tied with twine, and every one of them carried the work of her own hands. The rosemary balm her neighbor used on aching wrists. The lemon soap children loved because it smelled clean and sunny. The chest rub from her grandmother's recipe notebook. But the sign above the table did not carry her name. Esteban stood beside the display, calm as if nothing ugly was happening. Marlene kept handing samples to customers, bright and polished, as though she had every right in the world. Paloma stepped closer. "Those are my formulas." A few people in the crowd went quiet. One older woman frowned at the jars, then at Paloma, as if she recognized the scent before she understood the lie. Esteban gave a small laugh that made Paloma's stomach drop. "Your hobby inspired us," he said. "That's not the same thing." Inspired us. Sometimes humiliation doesn't come like thunder. Sometimes it comes under white market tents, with polite smiles, paper labels, and the sweet smell of cold processed soap covering something rotten. And if you've ever had someone steal the value of your own work while you were still standing there breathing, then you know that kind of hurt settles deep. Paloma's eyes fell to one of the labels, and that was when she saw the line that made her blood run cold. If this story pulls you in, leave a like and stay with me. That line on the label was small, almost hidden under the ingredient list, but Paloma saw it. Registered owners, Esteban Velez and Marlene Cross. Her throat went dry. She could still smell orange peel and lavender oil from the display, but now it all turned bitter on her tongue. Those jars, those bars, those little tins with the clean white lids, they had come out of her cramped kitchen, one slow batch at a time. Out of steam, sore wrists, and evenings spent over a stained counter with her grandmother's recipe notebook opened beside the stove. Paloma had never been the kind of woman who called herself a founder. She was the kind who saved every glass jar, who dried rosemary on a string by the window, who tested a salve on her own skin before handing it to anyone else. Her neighbors knew that. Mrs. Doyle from 2 doors down swore by the balm for her hands. The mail carrier once came back just to ask if Paloma had any more of the peppermint soap. People trusted her because the work was honest. That trust had not started at the town market stall. It had started in a kitchen so narrow that if the oven door was open, you had to turn sideways to pass. And Esteban knew all of that. He had watched her shave curls off cooling bars of cold processed soap with a butter knife. He had praised her patience. Marlene had sat at that same table, dipping a finger into jars and saying, "You could turn this into something real, you know." That was how it began. Not with shouting, not with stolen boxes in the night, but with help. Or what looked like help. Paloma lifted her eyes from the label and stared at the pair behind the table. Because all at once, she understood this betrayal had not started today. Once that thought took hold, Paloma could not unsee the little things. She began remembering the other details. Not the sweet things people remember when a story first starts. The laughter, the late coffee, the way a friend says, "I'm proud of you." Marlene asking too many exact questions about measurements. Esteban telling her she shouldn't waste time writing notes in the margins when she could streamline. The way both of them had started saying "our line," "our customers," "our future," while she was still the one standing over the stove, stirring, straining, waiting. Her kitchen had never looked like a business office. It smelled of beeswax, dried mint, and dish soap. The window stuck in humid weather. The burner clicked twice before it caught. She kept brown paper, string, and reused jars in old grocery boxes under the table. That was where the work lived, in heat, patience, and hands, not polished talk or printed labels. At first, their help had seemed harmless. Esteban offered to track orders. Marlene said she could make the jars look worthy of what's inside. And Paloma, who knew herbs better than contracts, let herself feel relieved. That is how some people enter your life when they plan to take from you. They do it through the door marked burden. They offer to carry what you're tired of holding. Then came the small changes. A supplier called one afternoon asking for Marlene's reorder. Esteban once took a box of soaps to photograph them and brought them back with 2 bars missing. Marlene borrowed copied formula cards and returned them in a different order, acting annoyed when Paloma noticed. At the time, she told herself not to be suspicious, because suspicion feels ugly when love is still in the room. But standing there at the stall, she remembered one evening in particular, the night Marlene asked for the original notebook. She remembered that night with painful clarity. The kitchen was warm from the stove, and the air smelled faintly of chamomile and melted oils. Paloma had just finished pouring a fresh batch into molds when Marlene leaned against the counter and said, almost casually, "Why don't you let me take the real notebook home? Just for one night. I can organize the names, clean up the wording, make it all look professional." Paloma had wiped her hands on a dish towel and looked over at the drawer where it stayed wrapped in an old cloth. That notebook was not some random stack of notes. It still carried her grandmother's slanted handwriting, little stains from herbs, even a pressed leaf tucked between 2 pages. Some people inherit jewelry, some inherit land. Paloma had inherited instructions, patience, and a way of caring for people through her hands. She said no the first time. Marlene did not argue. That was the clever part. She only smiled and said, "Of course. I just hate seeing you stay small when what you make is this good." Esteban, from the table, chimed in without even looking up. "She's trying to help, Paloma. You always act like people are taking something from you." That sentence had stung, because at the time she still wanted to be fair. So she compromised. She did not hand over the whole thing. She copied several remedy pages onto loose cards and clipped them together for Marlene to review. Marlene thanked her, kissed her cheek, and left with the stack pressed against her chest like something precious. A week later, the cards came back. But the order was wrong. 2 corner notes were missing, and one formula name, one her grandmother had never used, had been rewritten in Marlene's handwriting. Standing at the market now, Paloma realized that was the first theft she had actually held in her hands. And the worst part was this. She had tried to speak up back then. Just one evening, after dinner dishes were still drying by the sink, Paloma sat across from Esteban and told him the copied cards had come back altered. She remembered the hum of the refrigerator, the wet smell of the dish towel in her hands, the way the kitchen light made everything look tired. Esteban barely glanced up. Marlene was probably trying to make the names cleaner, he said. You get attached to little things. Little things. That phrase stayed with her. The notes in the margins were little things. The timing of an infusion was a little thing. The way one herb had to steep cooler than another was a little thing. People who don't build with their hands always call the heart of the work a little thing, right before they take it. Paloma tried once more. She told him those formulas were not decoration. They had come from years of testing, from her grandmother's hands to hers. Esteban sighed, pushed his chair back, and gave her a look she would later come to know too well. The look of a person already standing on stolen ground, pretending it belongs to him. You're making this harder than it has to be, he said. Marlene understands presentation. I understand growth. You understand making soap. Everybody has a role. A role, not ownership or authorship. After that, changes came faster. Marlene started talking about wholesale orders Paloma had never agreed to. Esteban opened an account in a business name Paloma had not chosen. And one afternoon, when she went to put away a new batch, she found a stack of printed labels tucked inside Esteban's car door pocket. She pulled one free, and there, under a shiny logo she had never approved, was a product name only her grandmother had ever used. She had confronted them about that label too. She waited until evening, when the house was quiet and the last of the dishes had dried in the rack. The printed sticker stayed in her apron pocket all day, stiff against her hip, like a warning she could not ignore. When Esteban came in, she laid it on the table between them. He looked at it once, then leaned back in his chair. "You went through my car?" That was his first answer. Just offense, the kind people use when truth corners them before they are ready. Paloma felt heat rise into her face. There was still the smell of rosemary oil on her fingers, and her shoulders ached from lifting molds, but she kept her voice steady. "Why is my formula under a name I never approved?" Esteban rubbed his jaw and gave a tired sigh, as if she were the problem after a long day. "Because you hesitate over everything. Because if we waited for you to feel ready, nothing would leave that kitchen." That kitchen. The same narrow room where he had once called her gifted. The same stove where she had stood through steam and splattered wax, making small batch salves and tinctures while he talked about scale and opportunity. It is a cruel thing when someone first praises your hands and later uses those same hands as proof that you belong only in the background. Paloma asked where Marlene fit into this. Esteban didn't even try to soften it now. "She knows how to present a product. I know how to build a company. You know how to make things. That's the division." Division. Such a clean word for such a dirty act. The next morning, Marlene swept into the kitchen with coffee and fake cheer, reached for a box of wrapped bars, and said, almost lightly, "Good news! We got approved for the weekend launch." Paloma stared at her. "We?" Marlene didn't even blink. She set the box down on the counter, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and gave Paloma that smooth little smile people wear when they think charm can cover theft. "Yes, we," she said. "The launch is already arranged. Branding is done, the permits are handled, and the table is paid for. This is good news." Good news. Paloma could hear the burner ticking as it cooled. The kitchen smelled of citrus oil and warm wax, but the room felt suddenly airless. She looked from Marlene to Esteban, waiting for one of them to say this had gone too far, that of course her name would be there, that of course no one meant to push her out of her own work. But some truths arrive very quietly. Esteban kept drinking his coffee. Marlene kept talking about packaging, customer flow, display height, as if the woman who made everything in those boxes were only there to listen. "I never agreed to this," Paloma said. Marlene's smile thinned. "You agreed every time you let us move things forward." "No," Paloma said, firmer now. "I let you help." That changed the room. Esteban set his mug down a little too hard. "Paloma, enough. You keep acting like this is some kind of attack. It's business." Business. Another clean word, used like bleach over a stain that would not come out. Then Marlene said the sentence that lodged itself deep, the one that would later burn in Paloma's chest on tired mornings and hungry nights. "You are a soap hobbyist," she said. "A talented one, sure, but still a hobbyist. You were never going to build something real on your own." Paloma stared at her friend and understood all at once that the weekend launch had never been meant to include her at all. So when market day came, she didn't arrive as a partner. She arrived as the woman they planned to erase. That was the truth sitting underneath the whole ugly scene. Paloma looked at Marlene first, then at Esteban, and something in her face must have changed because even Marlene's posture tightened for a second. Around them, people kept pretending to browse. A hand hovered over a soap bar and pulled back. Someone uncapped a tester bottle and quickly set it down again. The market had that strange silence public shame creates. The sound of people deciding whether they want any part of what they're witnessing. Paloma reached toward one of the jars, not to take it, only to turn it so the label faced the crowd. Marlene moved faster and caught her wrist. "Don't," she said under her breath. Paloma pulled her hand back. "Tell them whose work this is." Esteban gave that calm little smile he used when he wanted to seem reasonable. "Please don't do this here." Here. As if there would have been a more comfortable place to strip her name off years of labor. A woman near the corner of the stall, Mrs. Doyle, the one who used to ask for her bomb, squinted at the jars and said softly, "Paloma made something like that for me before." Marlene turned at once. "She inspired some early ideas," she said. "But this line was developed properly." Properly. That word landed beside hobbyist and joined it. One insult for her hands, another for her worth. Paloma felt heat rush to her eyes, but she would not cry for them. "You registered my formulas." Esteban's voice dropped. "And if you keep causing a scene, security will remove you from the town market stall." There are moments when the heart breaks loudly, and there are moments when it breaks with paperwork, smiles, and witnesses. Paloma looked at him, then at the sign above their table, and understood she could not go home with him after this. That realization carried her all the way home. In shock. The kind that makes every ordinary thing feel wrong. The key scraped too loudly in the lock. The hallway smelled stale. A dish she had left drying that morning was still by the sink, innocent as anything, and Paloma stood there looking at it, as if she had walked into somebody else's life. Esteban came in nearly an hour later. He did not rush to explain. He did not say he was sorry. He set his keys down, loosened his collar, and asked, with that same cold calm, "So, are you finished embarrassing us?" Us. Paloma turned slowly. "You stole my work." "No," he said. "We built something out of it. There's a difference." That was the moment the last thread snapped. Here, in the kitchen where she had once believed she was loved, not at the stall or when Marlene grabbed her wrist. The room still smelled faintly of oils and clean linen, but the warmth had gone out of it. Esteban kept talking about timing, branding, investment, momentum, as if cruelty sounded better when dressed in business words. Then he said the line she would carry like a coal inside her ribs. "You're a soap hobbyist, Paloma. You were never going to make this into anything real." She stared at him for one long second, then walked past him. She didn't argue or beg. She opened the drawer, took out the cloth-wrapped notebook, her measuring spoons, a bundle of dried herbs, and the small hand stamp she used for plain paper labels. That was all. A life's work, reduced to what could fit inside one worn canvas bag. If someone has ever tried to make you feel small in your own gift, you know this part. The leaving is quiet. The shaking comes later. Paloma reached for the last shelf above the stove and froze. 2 pages were missing from the notebook. For a second, Paloma could not breathe. She turned the notebook over in her hands, then back again, fingertips trembling against the worn paper edge. The missing pages had been torn out cleanly, not by age, not by accident. Someone had lifted them on purpose. One held her grandmother's winter chest rub. The other carried an old skin balm people had asked for by name for years. Paloma closed her eyes, and the whole room seemed to tilt. The stove, the shelf, the faded dish towel, all of it. Then something steadied in her. The pain remained. There was no more confusion left. When betrayal shows its full face, it leaves you with grief, but it also leaves you with clarity. She wrapped the notebook in its cloth, took her bag, and walked out before Esteban could turn one more theft into one more excuse. The room she found to rent was barely larger than her old kitchen. A hot plate on a crate, one narrow bed, a little window that rattled when trucks passed. On the first night, she sat on the floor with the notebook in her lap and listened to the hum of the cheap refrigerator in the hall. She could still hear Marlene's voice in her head. Soap hobbyist. That phrase burned. It hurt. And then, slowly, it began to harden into something useful. By morning, Paloma had made a decision. She would not chase their brand. She would not beg for her own work back. She would start again from the pages they had not stolen. Batch by batch, jar by jar. She bought the smallest supplies she could afford. Oils in plain bottles, paper labels, a secondhand pot with a dent in the side. Back at her stovetop, she began reformulating everything, changing ratios, testing textures, writing fresh notes in a school notebook beside the old one. 3 nights later, with her first new tins cooling on a tray, there came a soft knock at her door. That knock came again, gentle this time, almost apologetic. Paloma opened the door with a dish towel still in her hand and found Mrs. Doyle standing there in a cardigan, carrying the faint smell of rain and grocery store coffee. Her eyes dropped at once to the cooling tins on the tray by the window. "I knew that scent," the older woman said softly. "I was walking past and thought it couldn't be, but it is." For a second, Paloma could not answer. The room was so small that the mint and beeswax in the air seemed to press close around them. She had not told anyone where she moved. She had not hung a sign. She had not made any announcement. She was just trying to rebuild something clean from what had not been stolen. Mrs. Doyle stepped inside when Paloma nodded. She looked around once, the hot plate, the stacked jars, the folded paper labels, and then she looked back at the tray. "Do you have any of the hand balm ready?" Paloma gave a small, uncertain laugh. "Not much. I don't need much." That first sale did not sound grand. No ribbon, no display, no polished speech. Just a $5 bill smoothed on a little table and a woman saying, "I'd rather buy from the person who knows what she's making." Sometimes, that is how a life begins again. Not with applause, but with one person choosing truth. After that, Paloma worked like a woman stitching herself back together. Dawn batches before odd jobs, labels cut by hand at night, new notes beside the old ones, changed ratios, longer cures, better lids. She rented a folding table 2 weekends later and set out 6 tins, 8 bars, and 3 amber bottles. By noon, half of them were gone. And just as she was wrapping a jar for a young mother, a familiar shadow stopped on the other side of her table. Marlene was standing there, alone, holding one of Paloma's new labels between her fingers. Marlene looked polished from a distance, but up close, Paloma saw it at once. The strain around her mouth, the sleeplessness under her eyes, the way her fingers kept worrying the edge of that label. "This is new," Marlene said, lifting the jar slightly. "You changed the blend." Paloma finished tying the customer's package before answering. "I had to." The young mother thanked her and stepped away. Only then did Paloma look fully at the woman across from her folding table. The afternoon air carried the smell of dust, mint, and warm pavement. Around them, people drifted past with shopping bags and paper cups, glancing over now and then the way people do when they sense history standing between two women. Marlene lowered her voice. We need to talk. There are people who come back when they miss you, and there are people who come back when they miss what you can do for them. Wisdom is learning the difference without needing anybody to admit it out loud. Paloma kept her hands on the table. Say what you came to say. Marlene gave a brittle laugh. You always did that. Cut straight through things. Then her face tightened. Sales are off. Customers complain the batches aren't the same. Esteban keeps saying we can fix it with better suppliers, better packaging, more promotion. But she glanced down at the jar. It's not working. Paloma said nothing. Marlene swallowed. I know you're angry. It's past that. That answer hit harder than shouting would have. For a moment, Marlene looked almost ashamed. Almost. Then she stepped closer and put both hands on the table. Come back, she said quietly. Not as before. Better. We can work something out this time. Paloma stared at her old friend, at the same mouth that once called her a hobbyist. And for the first time, Marlene sounded like the one asking to be let in. The air between them seemed to hold still after that. Paloma did not answer right away. She could hear paper rustling from the next table, a child asking for honey candy somewhere behind her, the soft tap of jars when a breeze nudged the display. Ordinary sounds. But inside her, old rooms were opening. The cramped kitchen, the missing pages, the market humiliation, that one sentence thrown at her like trash. Marlene mistook the silence for softness. We were wrong, she said quickly. I know that. I know how it looked. Paloma's eyes lifted. How it looked? Marlene flinched, just a little. Then she tried again. Fine, was. We were wrong. But Esteban is impossible now, and the line is slipping, and people keep asking why the product's changed. We can fix this if you just... If I just what? Paloma asked. Marlene leaned in. The smell of expensive perfume drifted over the clean scent of balm and soap. Come back in, quietly. We relaunch. We make you head of development, or whatever title you want. We keep the name people already know, you do what you do, and this time, you get your share. Your share. That was the part that almost made Paloma smile. Not from humor, from clarity. They had stolen the root and were now offering her a branch as if it were generosity. A customer approached, then sensed the tension and stepped away. Marlene lowered her voice further. I'm trying to make this right. No, Paloma said, calm as still water. You're trying to survive what you broke. The words landed cleanly. No shouting, no spectacle. Marlene's eyes filled, though whether from guilt, pride, or panic, Paloma could not tell. Then Marlene reached into her handbag with shaking fingers and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. You should see this before you say no, she whispered. Paloma looked down and saw her grandmother's handwriting on the page. Paloma unfolded the page carefully. It was one of the missing sheets, her grandmother's skin balm, written in that slanted hand she would have recognized anywhere. A brown stain marked the corner. A note in the margin read, For cracked hands, warm the oil slowly. Don't rush what is meant to soothe. For one brief second, the market noise fell away. All Paloma could see was that page, carried back to her not by loyalty, but by collapse. Marlene's voice shook. I found it in a storage box. There are other things too. Notes, drafts, old labels. Esteban kept everything. Paloma, please, we can fix this. We can put your name on it now. We can make this whole thing right. Paloma lifted her eyes. There was no heat in them anymore. That was what Marlene had not expected. Anger, yes. Tears, maybe, but not peace. No, Paloma said softly. You can't fix it by inviting me into the same house you helped burn down. Marlene's mouth trembled. Then what do I do? Paloma folded the page and placed it beside her cash tin. You tell the truth where you lied. You keep whatever is left of that business if you want it, but you keep me out of it. Then she picked up one of her own jars and turned it so Marlene could see the label clearly. Just clean paper, steady ink, and the family name restored where it belonged. That was her answer. Some things only hold together when they cure slowly. Stir too fast, steal the heat, press them into shape before their time, and they crack from the inside. But the batch made honestly, in a plain pot, with patient hands, that one lasts. By evening, the folding table was almost empty. Paloma packed the last jar in tissue, slid the recovered page back into the notebook, and tied the cloth around it with calm fingers. When she locked her little workroom that night, the scent of herbs and clean soap clung to her sleeves like a blessing she had earned. If this story stayed with you, write "made with patience" in the comments. And stay close for the next one.